Hi there, and welcome to today's episode of A Different Way of Seeing, a podcast where we talk all things disability. I'm your host, Lois Strachan, and today we are very excited to introduce a guest who is going to be talking to us about her experience and her life receiving a diagnosis of neurodiversity as an adult. Mayet Banos has consented to join us, and I'm really looking forward to hearing her story and sharing some of the techniques and tools that she has to share with us. So, Mayet, um, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. First, I really wanted to thank you, Lois, for having me. I am beyond inspired and honored to be sitting in front of you and your wonderful audience today. And I do understate inspired. So I'm very happy to be here.
Well, thank you.
For those of you, oh, go ahead.
I was going to say thank you so much for saying that. I really appreciate
Oh,
it. Yeah.
it's really an honor. My name is Mayet Banos. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm based out of Houston, Texas. I am also the founder of a business called Visions Creative Ventures, where I help people just turn their bold ideas into big achievements. And I absolutely love what I do. I've been doing it for a long time, and that was prior to being diagnosed as an adult with ADHD. So one can say that growing up in an environment where everyone was kind of quote unquote normal, and when it came to health, only the physical aspects of health were considered.
Hmm.
My journey of learning, adapting, and just living as an adult with ADHD, as a business owner with ADHD, and even a consultant to other neurodivergent people was a complete shift, an exploration, trial and error, but most of all, really curiosity and open-mindedness.
I think I've noticed and been really happy to see that there has been a greater shift towards awareness of neurodiversity in society, in the workplace. And I think it's so important because for so many years it's always been kind of dismissed and ignored. And I think the recognition of neurodiversity is it really must be making a huge impact on those who are no longer having to hide their condition. But as you say, you received a diagnosis as an adult. What was the impact of receiving that diagnosis?
For me, it was an unexpected moment of clarity,
Hmm.
followed by an intense feeling of relief, and then, of course, a gradual shift of perspective. I remember I was listening to a podcast actually where the host shared her experience about accidentally discovering that all her so-called quirks were actually symptoms of ADHD and how she was subsequently diagnosed. I was in awe. I remember I completely stopped what I was doing and I listened to everything that she was saying, and to almost every point I stopped and I thought, oh gosh, that's me.
Hmm.
And it almost brings me to tear, Lois. It really makes me emotional because the relief I felt, the light bulbs going off. The longer she talked, the more I got the sense that everything I once thought was wrong with me, there was probably an explanation for. And so I
Yeah.
immediately went online and I took an online test.
Mhm.
Turns out I exhibited quite a few of the symptoms that were required to be considered as having ADHD. So I sought out a professional. I got tested, and bam, lo and behold, I've got ADHD. But for the very first time, I didn't actually feel broken. I didn't feel scared. I didn't feel like a mouse thrown into a maze without a map.
Mm.
I actually felt like, I felt clarity because all these so-called quirks, all these bad habits and tendencies that kept popping up and I thought were flaws, they weren't just flaws. They were actually symptoms, and symptoms can be treated. They can be
Yeah.
managed. It can be leveraged even. And so I really felt like for the first time there was some sort of hope for me.
Okay. And I've also had a family member whose son was diagnosed with autism as a young adult. And his son also, or both of them actually, expressed that real sense of relief about suddenly having understanding about things that had been seen as a problem, but they had no understanding of why it was happening, and suddenly realizing that there was a reason, there was a diagnosis. And the sense of relief, I think, is something that, has been of huge benefit to many people. And my sense is that it's really been during the pandemic that the awareness of mental health and ADHD, autism, and conditions like those. And I mean, it seems, I know it's simplistic to lump them all together, but the recognition is really been one of what I see as one of the positive side effects of coming out of the pandemic movement. I mean, there was a horrific time for everyone globally, but I think there have been some positives that have come out of it. And this is one that I think has been one of those. So just for many of our listeners who are immersed in the world of the physical disabilities, understanding what the letters ADHD stand for and and exactly what it is are perhaps a little unclear. If you were describing ADHD to someone who was not didn't have much understanding, was asking for the first time, how would you describe ADHD, and what do the letters ADHD actually stand for?
Course. ADHD, or attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, is described as a persistent or ongoing pattern of inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsiveness in a way that gets in the way of everyday life and typical development of a human being.
Mm.
Um, According to the DSM-5, people with ADHD can often have difficulties with maintaining attention, starting an activity, organizing, managing tasks,
Hmm.
and developing a working memory. And ADHD usually does present itself in three ways. First, inattentive presentation, hyperactive impulsive presentation, and third, a combination of both hyperactive and impulsive and inattentive patterns. So I can share a few symptoms of each of these presentations and kind of, how they apply to myself as well.
That would be fantastic. Thank you very
Of
much.
course. Symptoms of inattentive presentation often include struggling to give close attention to details specifically, or seeming like making careless mistakes, following through on instructions, especially verbal given instructions, difficulty with organization, losing things often, being easily distracted or even forgetful in everyday activities that one seems to do repetitively,
Mhm.
but it's not so, you know? And even avoiding tasks that are require like a lot of thought, you know, can be considered inattentive presentation. While symptoms of hyperactive impulsive presentation include fidgeting or not being able to sit still, extreme restlessness, or even feeling like you're driven by a motor or an internal force that is inexhaustible, talking excessively, interrupting, or having difficulty waiting and taking turns, and just difficulty staying quiet during quiet activities and engaging in those things. So those are all symptoms that ADHD is described as, but you have to have at least 5 of those symptoms in order to consider having ADHD. And for myself, well, I have a few inattentive presentations, mostly inattentive, with a few hyperactive impulsive presentations. So, needless to say, it makes life fun and interesting.
I can imagine. So, what are some of the challenges that you've kind of had to work with or navigate
Yeah.
as a person living with ADHD?
Well, being a business consultant, problem solving is something that comes very easily to me
Mhm.
when it comes to other people. However, navigating my own adversities is somewhat of a rockier road, to say the least. And well, if anyone's ever heard of a gifted child syndrome, bells are probably about to go off here. So, growing up as a child, I excelled as almost everything, and there were very high expectations of me,
Mhm.
very little reward. Perfection was pretty much a standard. So, I pretty much tested out of prep. I sped through college and I found myself with a fancy piece of paper, but absolutely no executive functioning skills. I'm talking no timeline setting, no deadline, organization, managing time, goal setting, and even self-control were things that came very, very, difficult to me.
Mhm.
And suddenly the world outside of this structured environment became a maze, one that I felt starkly unprepared for, and one I really struggled to navigate. I struggled to meet deadlines. My relationships dwindled because I didn't really put any consistent effort into maintaining them. And I felt like I watched everyone else around me achieve their goals with
Mhm.
little to no effort, while I experienced these intense periods of hyper focusing and action, followed by complete disregard of everything I've been doing and abandonment of my progress. And so having ADHD can feel like there's no permanence to what I do. And there's a lack of time awareness that makes things seem really unattainable, especially because I become obsessed with the perfectionism and every detail being perfect, which is to say, the tendencies that I've developed having ADHD and being undiagnosed for the majority of my life have presented themselves in these ways, in these little challenges. And to be honest, I've gone hours without eating or getting
Mhm.
up because whatever I'm working on is just not perfect. And I've lost opportunities because I've let imposter syndrome convince me I'm not qualified. And I've lost touch with friends because I just didn't feel like I had a battery for other people in my life. You know, I think the difference really is where I used to beat myself up about these things and see them as just flaws and I'm unlovable. I just see them as symptoms manifesting in my life and urging me to look within and make some sort of change.
Okay. So, what strategies have you adopted to help you to work through these?
Worse. Oh, I've picked up quite a few little strategies here and there to help me function as a human. And some I've sought out as soon as I got my diagnosis, some I've been doing for years.
Hmm.
First and foremost, the practice of actively maintaining my mental health and understanding it has been instrumental, whether it's traditional therapy or self-help. Having that sense of accountability and consistency to my inner world in a place that feels safe to me is a total game changer. Absolutely. The second thing I think is really important are, I found that going through these periods of intense explosive energy followed by intense burnout, that self-care and isolation have become very important to me. I have what I
Hmm.
call these wind up and wind down rituals in the morning and at night that help me feel centered, grounded, balanced, and driven, really. And, in the morning, I like to stretch, walk my dog, I soak in the sun as I think about what I'm grateful for. I plan out my day and my bullet journal, and I just feel prepared. At night, I feel like I rest the best when I take the time to stretch, when I cross out whatever I've done in the day, plan out the next day, take the time to just breathe. And, sometimes I journal when I feel especially restless, and I do find that this helps, but I don't beat myself up when I don't do it. These things they're not a hard discipline. They're just little activities that help me feel more prepared for my day and less cluttered at night. Um,
Brilliant.
Another one.
Mm.
Oh, yeah.
Carry on.
I love these little rituals. I have so many tips I'd love to share. I could go on and on, but I'll keep
I'm
it to
happy for
maybe
you to do
six.
that. Okay.
One more thing that really helps me when I need to stay on task and productive is body doubling, or just the act of working along another person as a way of maintaining accountability and focus. As motivated as I am, I also get easily distracted and I sometimes procrastinate. So the pressure of having someone nearby really helps me focus and stay on task on whatever I really need to be doing instead of every incoming email or the million little side tasks that pop up around the day.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. And, that leads me to my next strategy, which I love, love, love. I like to use a bullet journaling method to plan out my life and kind of like with mindfulness while allowing myself to adapt to the changes of the day, the week, and pretty much the overall layout of my life, which isn't stable as one could imagine.
Yeah.
Um, this method is focused on like the flexible organization of tasks, events, and thoughts in a manner that really allows you to express your creativity while planning in a structured manner. So I really, really like it. I've been doing it since college, and I particularly like including habit tracking in like my daily or monthly spread so that it keeps consistency and helps me kind of track my development. Oh, I could go on for hours about how this has been an instrumental strategy for myself, but we'd be here forever. So I'll move on to the easiest and probably most cathartic strategy, and it just happens to live within my bullet journal. I do these little things called brain dumps, and this is everywhere, not just for ADHD, but it absolutely helps. It refers to the practice of jotting everything down that comes to mind, essentially transferring the clutter of your brain onto a piece of paper in a free-flowing
Hmm.
manner. And I do this for a minute or so, or until I feel like my head is less of a buzzing beehive. And it really, really helps. I often follow this practice by meditating for a second. And if time allows, if it's, early on in the day, I'll pick one thing to focus on to help myself feel a little more accomplished and clear it out. And so it really does help, even particularly at night when I feel super restless. This is a winner. And the very last strategy I want to mention is having a randomness basket. Sounds very
Mm.
strange. I actually picked this up on, I believe, another video about ADHD when I was learning about it, and I really like this one because I have a lot of things. I like things and I have a lot of clutter in my life, and I'm always doing all kinds of things. So I'm picking things up and putting them down, probably in places where I'm not going to look 3 hours later when I really need them. And so I've adopted this basket that I put on the side of my desk. And as I go through the day, whatever I pick up and I just can't be bothered to think about, I just set down on this basket. And I go on about my day. And at the end of the day, I take the basket and I empty it out. I put everything where it goes. And I am so much happier. My room thanks me for it, and so does my brain.